name is Stephanie. Welcome to my channel, Edible Thoughts Makes. This channel is where I share with you my works in progress, finished projects, things I'm cooking up, books I'm reading, funny things the kids say. My hope is that as you watch this episode and the previous episodes that you find some inspiration along the way. In this episode today, I'd like to feature a finished project. Sometimes my episodes are more vlog style, sometimes they're like full-on podcast styles, closer to an hour, and then sometimes they are shorter 5 to 15 minute segments that feature finished projects. So that is what I have for you today. Today I'd like to share with you the Fantastitch by Stephen West. This is my first pattern that I have knit by Stephen West. I have decided that over many projects and kind of figuring out what goes with my rhythm or my mood or just what I like in general, I find I really enjoy garter when it's knit flat and minimal lace, so like simple eyelets are okay. I have yet to try brioche. I like the idea of how it's reversible and you can really make two colors pop with that, but I've not tried it yet. And I love color work, and slip stitching is nice too because you don't have any floats. So a lot of the Stephen West patterns have a lot of garter. Shawls often are knit flat, and so that works well for me. He likes to play with color. I like to play with color. And I have noticed that there is some flexibility for where you decide to end your project. Also, like what colors you're substituting in or how you're substituting in colors, switching things around. And I really appreciate that versatility in a pattern because you may not always have that specific yarn called for in the pattern, or you may decide you don't want something that big or that small, or whatever the case may be. It's nice to have that option to make it your own. So the Fantastitch comes in two sizes. You can knit the smaller size or the larger size. Finished measurements are 78 or 96 inches for the wingspan, and the depth would come out to 23 or 29 inches. Depending on which size you're knitting. It is knit and fingering weight yarn in 7 different colors, and I believe he has 3 or 4 of them use, the 3 or 4 of them use a Surrey alpaca silk. Now, when I was picking out my colors, I was inspired by woods and nature-y colors, and I don't have a ton of mohair or Surrey alpaca. Actually, the only Surrey alpaca I have is the one that I used for my Bennett shawl, which is in the previous episode to this, and I used all of it, the all of one 50-gram skein. And then I have a little bit of mohair, plum mohair, remaining from my As If tea that I made last year. So I started using that mohair in it, and then realized I don't like knitting mohair held by itself. You just can't feel it. Although I'm thinking that maybe it would have been different if I did it with the Surrey alpaca, because that's a little floofier, has a little more body to it. So maybe I wouldn't have minded knitting with that on its own. But anyway, I just switched out all of the mohair for merino, and a lot of it is just bits and ends of yarns that I already have left over from other projects, and it was a great way to use up those bits. And since each section is kind of its own in the different stitch patterns that you're doing, you can really switch up colors as often as you would like between each of the different patterns. So I ended up using, I think, 10 different colors. Although one of them had run out mid-section, and so I substituted one that was close enough, and so you could say I really only used 9 colors since one of them was a add-in, but I used 10 different yarns. And I did use the needles recommended. It's US 5 or 3.75 millimeter circulars, and I had so much fun. I really like the pattern layout. I thought it was easy to follow, and the sections are broken up so that you can keep your place pretty well. And I just really enjoyed it, and it was nice to have mini goals because I could say, okay, today I'm going to get to section 1 or section 2, or by this week I want to get to section 6, or whatever the case may be. Now, this is a semicircular shawl, which means whenever you increase stitches, it increases by a lot. So in the beginning it went pretty quickly, and then kind of halfway or 75% of the way through, the rows were getting much longer, and so at one point I had to just set it aside and take a break because it was overwhelming to think of how many stitches I had to get through in one row. And if it was a little more complicated in the stitch pattern, I just couldn't get through like one repeat without being interrupted, and that just made it frustrating. And so for those sections I did put in stitch markers between each pattern repeat. That way if I messed up somewhere, it was easier to go back and fix it because I could see it more quickly. Let's say like there's supposed to be 12 stitches between the stitch markers. Well, if there was one that had 13 or 8 or whatever the case may be, it was a lot quicker to catch that. But yeah, so I really enjoyed it. And then I kept track of how much yarn I was using in each section in case I was to make it again and then wanted to figure out my yarn management for each section. Here's my little section of mohair that I tried out and then decided that wasn't for me. Again, if I used the Suri alpaca, I probably would feel different about it because that's floofier and has a little more body to it. But yeah, so that's all I did of the mohair. But I just love how all the sections are different, and it just makes for a very captivating knit. So I guess one of the changes I made was here in this section. So I purposely did this section in this color because I thought it looked like lichen growing on trees. It's this light green with these speckles of navy and kind of a yellowish, brownish, orange color. But then I got tired of doing that stitch pattern and then just substituted in this dark brown and just did some garter until I got to the number of stitches that I needed before starting the next section. So that was really the only one that I changed up, and then I made the small size. So with the small size, you can decide later, like you can just start knitting. Everything's the same in the beginning, so you don't decide that until later. I can't remember, somewhere in here, if you want to do one more or two more, I can't remember exactly, but pattern before going to the border. So this border, I really enjoy the chevron with the striping. I just learned a lot of new pattern techniques and stitch patterns in here, and that was really, really fun. And I loved being able to play with color and switch things up depending on how much contrast I wanted or what I felt like would balance it out better at any particular time. This brick pattern is really fun. I loved that. I haven't done something like that. And I also really liked how this part turned out. The stitch definition in this section was really cool. I don't know if it's catching. Oh, there we go. How you kind of have the triangles playing with each other. And then these eyelet lines divided up each section really nicely. But yes, overall it was super fun to knit, and I could see people doing all sorts of different color combinations. Like if you wanted to just do one that was all shades of blue, you could do that and have like white and a really dark navy be your contrast in there, like a stronger contrast for when colors are playing together. So that's how I would pick what would go together or not. Like if there was going to be slip stitching in a certain textured area that played with two colors, then I'd pick two colors that were more contrasting. And I did use speckled yarn, and I don't think did I use anything, nothing super highly variegated. Well, I guess this is more variegated down here that I used, but see how then I contrasted it with a green, and the green is speckled too, but in a different way from how the brown was variegated, so that they didn't meld together. Because if I'm going to take the time to do a particular stitch pattern, I want that stitch pattern to shine, and I don't want the yarn to get lost in it. So that's how I would pick what would go where. So like the mauve and then the light green so that the stripes show through and this really cool pattern shows through there. But yes, I feel like with these kind of projects, it's good to have solids or less variegated skeins mixed in with your speckled ones if you're going to use speckled or highly variegated yarns so that your stitch pattern actually shows through. If you did it all in solids or semi-solids, it would look amazing too. You would have high contrast and that would look really, really cool. But if you decide to use more speckled or highly variegated ones, it's good to have those solids in there so that you can let the stitch pattern shine when you get to those sections. So yes, I recommend this pattern. I think it was so much fun. It was my first Stephen West pattern, and I am currently working on another one. It is the Triangle Parade, and I'm making it in all shades of purple. I cannot wait to tell you all about that one. So cheers to being creative. I hope you are staying well, being safe, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.